normally I just trim beginning and end and let it roll in the middle, and then we just post it on. It goes out to all the podcast sites out there, and we'll see how it goes.
Okay.
All right. So, and before I go, how do you pronounce your last name? Is it Waga or Waga?
Waga. Yeah.
Waga. Okay. That's cool. All right. Welcome to the Swedish Junior Hockey Podcast. Jacob Dahlin, your host here. Today, we're going to talk about Canadian juniors and specifically about Brooks Bandits, AJHL. Their skill coach, Kevin Yellowaga. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you for having me.
So let's give the background a little bit. Got introduced to you, I think, through my friend Paul Strand, that played some ball hockey with you and played university hockey against you. He's Alberta guy. So that's how I got connected with you early on.
Yeah, Paul was a good player here in Canada too. So you get to know everybody. He's a couple years younger than me, and certainly a more physical player than me. But some guys come into their own in university hockey too, and I'm sure he was a good point producer when he was younger, but he took off in university similar to a way that I took off in university, in terms of, now the game's making sense and you're preparing all week to play on the weekends, and you all of a sudden kind of get this second life. And we were both getting a lot of points in university for sure, and enjoying it. And that led into some ball hockey games and stuff. And in Alberta at the time, it seems like a lot of the young guys wanted to go for a ball hockey championship too, was a big deal. So we would have crossed paths a few times for sure.
Well, we'll talk about ball hockey in a second, because not a lot of people in the U.S. talk about ball hockey. I mean, I grew up playing. Everybody in Sweden plays one form of ball hockey, but it's more on the snow with a tennis ball. And I remember was three of us brothers, so somebody had to be the goalie. And you take your winter coat and you put a pillow on the inside of it, and you got a blocker and a glove, and then you put your regular helmet on and then regular shin pads under your ski pants, and a regular hockey helmet with a visor with a cage, and you're good to go.
Yeah, exactly.
The shots on the arms hurt the worst because you didn't have any pads there.
For sure, yeah, not a lot of padding.
But let's go back a little bit. You're from Manitoba, but I guess, how did you end up Manitoba, which is, let me see here, it's east of Alberta, right?
Yeah, way east Manitoba is, and closer.
Oh yeah, you got Alberta,
closer to where the Winnipeg Jets are, and north of that, my dad was a miner, so kind of just moved a lot when we were younger, even like when I was just born, and years 1 to 6 years old, moving around a lot. But my dad, he worked in the mines with Reggie Leach's dad, so he would tell me lots of stories that way. That brought us out to Vancouver, and the mines did, and dad mining, and then his cousin lived in Medicine Hat, and that brought us to Medicine Hat when I was just 6 years old. And not joking, Trevor Linden was like my next door neighbor. So he was a year younger than me in growing up in the Hat. And so that kind of, Medicine Hat really started the hockey for me. But in between stops, born in Manitoba, we moved to Vancouver, and there was some mining in Coquitlam and Squamish at the time, and then dad got us when I was 6 years old. We were already in Alberta for the rest of it, and in Medicine Hat. Yeah.
So Medicine Hat is in Alberta.
Yes, and
okay.
It's even crazier because now my son's only 15 years old, and he's billeting out in Medicine Hat to play hockey this year. So
I saw
that. Feels like home to me.
So what's awesome about Elite Prospects is you could see. So I pulled up Nate, 08 player, and I was going to ask about that because this is kind of the year for it. You tell me, because I'm not as familiar with, and I think it's cool to talk about. Is this his draft year?
Oh gosh, we went through it all last year,
Was it
and
last year?
it is, as no matter how much I could tell you, I'm involved in hockey, and I've worked with Braden Point along the way. He was in my academy, and Cale McCarr. I saw him at 7 and 8 years old. As much as I tell you, I've been around hockey. Nothing really prepares you for that. Like I wasn't stressed about it, but the stress that it puts on kids is the noise and all that. It was a tough, it makes it a tough year. Yeah. For
What
kids.
what we're talking about for those who don't know, when we're saying the draft year for a 15-year-old, that's the OHL draft
Is
in
for
Canada.
14 for WHL. Yeah.
Oh, for four. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So the OHL being 15 and the WHL being 14. And they have umpteen ranking sites. And I kind of knew my son would be talked about for sure. And we had to go through all that process, and it's difficult. And ultimately, you want your son to draft as high as he can. And I knew he was rated in the first round. And ultimately, I I just I believe in long-term development. So I thought, for him, and in talking with him and what he's been exposed to, that college made a lot more sense. So as soon as that happened, yes, they were still interested, but then he drafted later, and
Yep. Yep. Yep.
and eventually the Brooks Bandits signed him, of course. So
Yeah. So that's the other thing. So he's already 24, 25 commit to Brooks, or is that,
yes,
or how does it work? Let's talk about that, because we can use your son as an example, because I think it's educational.
it is.
The,
It
the,
is good
the,
learning.
talk about it, because I don't know enough about it, and I'll tell you kind of the reason why we started this podcast was when my son went to Sweden last year. I didn't know anything about Swedish juniors, even though I grew up there, and then nobody over here knows anything about Swedish juniors. So that this was and there was no podcast about Swedish juniors, so that's why why I started this, and then the one that's learned the most has been me. And hopefully some people have learned about it. But then we've talked about a lot of it's morphed into then talk about, for the Swedish audience, about what's it like for juniors in the US. And then we ended up having some guests on uh, about the BCHL. But one of the issues about AJHL, where Brooks is, Europeans are currently not eligible to play unless they have been playing there for, I think, what is it, 3 years? Uh,
Okay.
that's kind of the way in if you're European.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
no, certainly you see more in the Western League, and there's an import draft. And I just know that in the AJHL you don't see a lot of them. I know on our Brooks team though, we had special permission to have two players from the Ukraine play for us. And that's super unique. And one of them still playing with us. And that's
okay.
really unique situation as well.
But explain, there's this term that frankly I'm not as familiar with, and that is the cards. What is the cards in Canadian juniors?
Yeah, I don't know enough about the cards, like and protected lists and stuff like that. Like I'm sure the Bandits are allowed to have a certain number of, like the AJHL is allowed to have a certain number of rostered players, and then
Yep.
a certain amount of carded players as well. But I wouldn't be the right guy to ask about the numbers and how all that works.
Yep. But
It's just,
a carded player means that they're a rostered, protected player, right?
yes, yes, but yeah, carded meaning protected. Yeah, but like I say, I don't know enough about the rules. So WHL, you sign a contract, and you belong to them. So
Yep.
AJHL, you're within Hockey Canada. They probably, along with their 20 protected players, they can probably card some extras, and
Yep.
whether they're on the team or not, but they belong to you. So
Correct. But they
so
have, you can't have
that's all
40.
Brooks gets. Like, we don't get to draft. So you know, I'm sure you're always recruiting kids and hoping that some of them land on at your camp and eventually sign a card with you. Yes.
Yeah. So in terms of Nate's, he's an 08. He's only 15.
Yeah.
Right. And the junior eligibility in Canada, in AJHL, you can play all the way till in the North American Hockey League, you can play all the way to 20, but you can't be 21 at 12/31 of the calendar. How's it
Right.
like in AJ?
Similar in AJ, like my son's a 15-year-old, so he's as an affiliate to the Bandits, he's allowed to play 5 games with them. And that's all that, and same in the WHL, any of his buddies that are drafted, they're allowed 5 games as a 15-year-old. And then they can play all of 16, all of 17, 18, 19, and 20.
So technically next year,
In
when
that
he
league.
comes to Brooks,
Yeah,
he can play 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. He could play 5 years there.
he could. Yeah.
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 I mean, that's a long, long
Yeah.
period. And
Yeah. And same in the WHL. Yeah.
and the same
Yeah.
in the WHL.
Yeah.
And but so if we go and we'll talk about we can go there right away. I mean the AJHL. So let's talk about junior A first. So you have the major juniors, which is going to be the OHL, WHL, and the Q. And then
Yeah.
under that, in terms of the Canadian junior system, you used to have BCHL. If I go West Coast to East Coast, you have BCHL, you have AJHL,
SJHL.
SJI, what is it, SIJHL or SJHL?
SJHL. Yeah.
And then you have MJHL,
Yeah.
and then you have CCHL. Then it gets a little harder.
There's probably a few in Ontario. Like there's probably the OJHL.
Oh, I forgot about OJ. Yeah.
Yeah. So there, I don't, yeah. And
But all of those, excluding then the BCHL that broke off from Hockey Canada. Uh, so out of these, not every one of them is as strong as the other. Right?
the leagues aren't as strong as the other. That's, yeah, it's so hard to say. Like I've been around this business long enough that I would think there's 3 or 4 teams in each league that are strong. Like
Yeah.
you can't compare. Like I just don't think you could really, anybody can really say. I mean, if I wanted to be boastful, like Brooks has won the Canadian Championship a few times, and all they haven't faced is BC. Well, I'm sure BC's strong, and I'm sure their champion would have a great series with us too, you know, and yeah, and vice versa. Like it's yeah, and there's strong teams in Saskatchewan, and there's strong teams in Manitoba and stuff. So I don't know. And I asked a guy further, like, you know, where would Brooks fit in the USHL? Because that's another kind of league, and it's intriguing, and it's similar to the WHL, and it's similar to the AJHL. And these NCAA scouts told me, you know, Brooks would be fine in the USHL. There's just more teams like Brooks in that league. So in depth, you could talk depth always. You know, maybe the USHL has a little more depth, and I'm sure that BC league has some depth to it as well. And I feel like the Alberta League, we have pretty good depth. Like there's more parity, it seems, across the board because there's more leagues too. So,
but if you look at the roster for, for some reason, they're great when they're posting these. If you follow on social media, the games for whether it's USHL or AJHL, they post the rosters, and then right next to. So what we'll see with Nate in the future, he's going to be listed, and he's either going to be a starter, or he's going to be healthy scratch, or he's going to be on there somewhere, and he's going to be, here's number 6, Nate Yellowaga, right? And it'll say, is he a commit to college? And if you look at the current roster with Brooks on this, the guys that are playing for Brooks,
oh yeah,
it is packed. They're all D1 commits in US D1 NCAA.
that's exciting. I mean, and again, with there being no draft, You know, and the history within Brooks now, like a lot of teams that have college prospects want their kids to come and play in Brooks. And I'm lucky enough to be a skills coach. I certainly don't take credit for how talented these kids are. Like, man, I'm getting to work with some really talented kids when they arrive. And I hope that I give them a little bit of knowledge and growth in their game while they're there. But boy, oh boy, yeah, when your team has already players committed, and we even had a drafted NHL prospect this year that was at Brooks camp, like that. That's never happened. Like, I'm like, wow, it's pretty impressive in that regard. I mean, yeah.
Well, one
Just
that has gotten a little bit of press is this guy, Cale McCarr. Have you ever heard of him?
oh boy. And then it just snowballed. Yeah, that
Uh,
was
it,
so interesting because there you would have your biggest example in hockey. Like Cale was small, and the WHL and the Medicine Hat Tigers, you know, rightfully so, said, you know, he's probably a late pick. Like, he's awfully tiny. He's good. We know he's skilled, but he's awfully tiny. So we'll take him really late in the 8th round. Like, we don't know, like 250th. He's about the 250th best 14-year-old right now. And Ryan has our head coach in Brooks has such an eye, and he just watched him once in warmups, and this kid was so unique and twitchy, and you know, he could see some of those things, and some of these coaches that don't get biased or whatnot, they want offensive and unique type players, and Ryan is no different. I'm sure he saw a lot of unique traits in Cale, and then it was just probably about approaching the family and seeing if maybe a different choice of route would interest them. And it would have been crazy because Cale, right around that time, now he's not quite as big of a secret, and Medicine Hat's probably hoping he would sign with them as well. But ultimately, he got called up to Brooks, I think, and played some playoffs as a 16-year-old, and then all of 17. And he had a late draft year, so he drafted at 18. But it just took off, and not that it was never there, because I saw him when he was 8 and 9 years old. He would have been, you know, the 3rd best D on his team, on his local team in town, you know. In Bantam, he was okay. He would have been, again, the middle slotted defenseman on a AAA team, but he didn't make AAA in his first year even. But his belief and his freedom in his mind and his enjoyment of the game was super high always. So, and then a lot of these dads that advise me, they just say, make sure he's having fun, make sure he loves it.
yeah.
And I think he fit that criteria. He didn't have any kind of a special skills coach growing up. I know he did some good power skating and things like that, but the rest of the game was in his mind and his confidence about what he could do to be really unique. And when that kind of meshed together for him, he just went on a mission.
What was
Yeah.
his compete level even back then?
Well, he had lots of swagger and cockiness. Like, I feel like, I don't want to speak for him. I watched him pretty closely, and I think he had cockiness and swagger. He also fit the criteria. If he would make a lot of mistakes in a game. I don't know what his plus minus would be, but he made mistakes. Like, he wasn't perfect, but he was trying unique stuff. Like, he was jumping up. He was very offensive. So in his trying, I'm going to say, like, he figured out a lot of stuff. I think, because even in the Bandits with us, he still would make the odd mistake and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, he was not a perfect piece. And Brooks gave him that time. I know college that it jumped again.
Yeah.
I had a talk with NHL, like, general managers right in the rink, asking me like, what do you think he'll be good, or do you think he'll
Because
grow
he was not,
better?
he didn't fit the mold, right? He was not the traditional, typical back then. Now they're becoming
Tall and slight, like they would have believed he was too light and too small to be able to do much. And then they didn't have anything to compare it to. So those scouts get nervous. because everyone in the Western Hockey League, they can watch all the time. So exactly the example you were talking about, they didn't know how to compare the Western Hockey League with the AJHL.
Yeah.
So they're like, well, is the WHL way better? Or could this kid, even though he's in a lesser league, people would say, and I caution them that if Brooks played in the Western Hockey League, I think they would hold their own as well. You
Yeah.
know, they would be able to handle it. So, you know, they couldn't compare though. They didn't know how to compare that, even though he got a call to the World Juniors. And even in the World Juniors, then they started him as the 7th D. And they weren't sure how to use him because he's not a WHL guy. So it's fascinating. There's your big example of routes and choices. And through all the noise, whatever the leagues are, perform in the league you're in, and work hard and develop. And I think you can get there more than anything else. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's switch a little bit. So now we go from, one superstar to another superstar from North Carolina in the Raleigh area, Devin Phillips.
Yes.
So
He's a fun one to talk about.
yeah. So
Really fun.
Not as well known as Cale Makar.
No, not at all. And I think he came through here and he played in a tournament called the Max tournament that now's the Circle K for U18 players. And I remember it because my brother was in that tournament and Peter Nedved defected from that tournament. So,
Ooh.
and then there's Shattuck has been in it. Nugent Hopkins has been in it. Crosby has been in it, Devin Phillips' team was last place. I think they got beat most games 12-1 in that tournament. And Ryan and the Brooks Bandits still picked him out. Him out.
So here's the connection to Paul Strand, right? So he played for Paul he played in the Junior Hurricanes organization in Raleigh, played AAA, North Carolina, right?
Okay.
But then he played as a 16-year-old in the EHL for Paul's team. He had a EHL junior team. And I think that's the team. So he was an underage player playing EHL. They were a completely new organization trying to get started. And he led the league in the EHL on the worst team by far that Paul coached. And
proving himself there. So it was still junior hockey, but proving himself there.
And I need to have some conversation with Paul, but if I remember him telling the story was that either that team was the one who went up or he went up and played on another team in that tournament. But kind of similar too, because when we're talking about Devin Phillips, not necessarily the prototype player in terms of, I'm going to pull him up just so we can.
So much of like him, like a Rudy Rudiger and boy, just wanted to get better though every single day and really developed right before your eyes, like really took off and really kind of from being an unknown to just saying, I'm going to will this almost. Like he really did, but he asked great questions, like certainly to me, and was keen. But in the games, you talk about doing all the Brad Marchand things or going to all the hard areas. And boy, this kid just found his way and became a consistent player.
He's 5'9", 170.
Oh yeah.
And back then
he's tough.
But I remember Paul talking about like when he made the leap was when he decided to be diligent in the weight room, and then the ability to then play a different game opened up all kinds of stuff. But again, it's kind of like picking out. Nobody wanted him. He tried out all, and they're like, no, don't want him. And then he went up to Canada, got on Brooks, and so listen to these stats. Okay, so in his last year, when he was an alternate captain for Brooks Bandits, winning everything, he had 45 games and 91 points. That wasn't just that year. He had 116 games, 145 points the time he was up there in Brooks.
Yeah.
Signed with Holy Cross. I don't know. Let's look and see. He must have been, I don't know if he's hurt. He's only shown up as 5 games, 3 points this season. I'm not sure if he's hurt. But freshman year, true freshman year, 38 games, 18 points in NCAA D1 for
Is
a
a great first year.
yeah,
It's really good.
for a not so good team.
Yeah.
But again, he's 5'9", 111, oh, 5'9", 170.
But what you said, like I would never want to give, you don't want to give kids false hope, but you know, and and yeah, say, you know, they like you can play somewhere that you can't, but there is finding the right league for you and somebody giving you a chance and an opportunity. Isn't that a lot of hockey, you know? Because I've seen kids written off too, that for one coach, they're a healthy scratch and he can't even dress them. And for
Yep.
another coach, he's the same kid is 90 points in 50 games. Like that's unbelievable.
Yep.
One guy, he can't even play. And another guy, he's yeah, it's that's the craziness about hockey. Like I guess in its subjective nature, but if you start to know the mindset of kids, and I've been lucky enough to know not just their parents, but the mindset of kids, I think you would get a lot closer to being more right. But a lot of people don't take that time to really know what makes a kid tick, because Devin would meet all the criteria of mental toughness and character and things like that too.
Yeah. Another
Yeah.
kid that comes to my mind is a Swede, Lucas Edmonds, who played for Kinston Frontenacs, and then he was actually he was a third rounder, plays now for Syracuse Crunch in the AHL. But he was kind of a, you know, not taken off. He was playing in Sweden, got a couple of looks with the national team, but came over to to the OHL, 68 games, 113 points. Boom.
Wow.
And now is, you know, let's see, you know, 49 games last year, 27 points in the AHL. So, but in the right system. It's funny, we talked about this with other guests on this podcast about especially for, and kind of you may think about this with your son and being the 15-year-old. So in Sweden, when you're 15, it's the time when they are qualifying for the TV puck tournament.
Mm-hmm.
And then from the TV puck, which is your district, and then the district plays against the other districts, and then they have a national championship on national televised. You know, so this was huge back when there was only 2 channels on TV, and everybody watched the TV puck tournament. Now you can get NHL, but it's still the most prestigious hockey tournaments for 15-year-olds. But here's my point. From there, the best of the best, to take Rasmus Dahlin as an example. He was the best defenseman on Göteborg, I think, or Västergötland's, which was the district, Västergötland, that's what it was. And then he ended up being recruited to Frölunda. And if you think about how many NHL players come through Frölunda, has been enormous. But there's a lot of kids that are 15-year-olds that are, is it best for me to be a fourth liner on Frölunda or first liner in Timrå, right? Just going to the best top team may not be the right bus for you, because you're going to be in a seat so far in the back of the bus, and
Totally.
you're not going to flourish.
Yeah. And for me, the problem that happens in Canada a lot is you kind of have to master each level. So if you are a guy with 5 goals and 5 assists in Bantam AAA as you're in your 14-year-old year, well, then you're not looking to be on the U18 team, and you're not going to thrive, you know. So you kind of have to master each level. So I also admire kids and parents that say, okay, we're not on this fast-paced trend. We should probably be closer to, you know, accepting go to U17 and maybe try and lead there, or be in the middle and work my way up. But I think as parents, parents can get so caught up in just wanting the team and the higher division and stuff, and it doesn't always work that way neither.
Yeah. So let's go this route now. So I know Brooks went to Sweden this summer,
Yeah.
which was kind of cool. I didn't know about it, and all of a sudden I see, hey, they're playing. It was right at the time when I was over there, and I almost went to watch them. But they were in Karlstad, where Färjestad, which is they won the national championship last year, I believe, in the SHL, and their J20 team played with Karlskoga and a team from Norway, Denmark. It was like an international tournament.
Mhm.
No, yeah, maybe Karlskoga was just playing a exhibition game before this tournament. But talk about
Sure.
that.
Well, I wish I knew more about it. I know how much they enjoyed it and loved every aspect of it. And as far as
And they
a
won it
good,
too, right?
and they won it, but as far as it, was it a good test? Did it bring the group together? Did they learn more about the culture? Did they learn more about their team and do a lot of team building while they were there? And I only watched more on TV, of course, but I couldn't believe, for just having like a 2-week training camp before the Bandits went, they really looked in mid-season form. But like, again, the Bandits have a lot of really smart kids, and then with the ice being a little bigger and the Bandits being a good skating team, I think they kind of rose up even another level. Like, I'm like, you're playing some good hockey and it's only exhibition season. So it was surprising to me. And then when I talked to the coaches, they enjoyed it so much that they would be enthusiastic about possibly trying it again. Like, they really liked it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so they were playing against Färjestad J20 national team, which arguably is one of the top programs in Swedish juniors. I mean, you have J20 national, and then right underneath there is J20 region, Division 1, Division 2. And
Okay.
there's only the SHL teams that has for the most part. All the SHL teams, J20 teams, have an automatic spot in that. And then there's a few, like 3 or 4 other teams that are in there, like Djurgården, which is in Stockholm. They don't have an SHL team, but they're in J20 National. And but Färjestad is a powerhouse. I mean, that's where Håkan Loob came from. If you're a Calgary
Yeah.
guy who scored
Yeah, of
50 goals, he
course.
still got the most goals in the NHL by Swede.
Yeah.
And that's my when I was a kid, he was him, and
So good.
he actually have 2 brothers that all three played for Färjestad growing up. And they've been a powerhouse for a long time.
Yeah.
That was the competition that Brooks was playing, and beat him. So I think that, and it's funny when we talk about this, like, well, when I have kids on from Sweden that are playing in the Null, or Sweden uh, um, that are playing in the BCHL, how does it compare? And everybody will say, well, it's so different, right? The game is completely different. Um, so when you have these teams that are playing against each other, it is a completely different game. But it would be so fun to have a USHL team. I think USHL would I mean, more international tournaments, but with a full team, or a NOL team. That, NOL, you may have it's all 20-year-olds, and then you got the USHL where they're all 17-year-olds, and then you got AJHL, which has 16 and 20-year-olds in here.
No, I agree. Like, that would be more like the Champions League in soccer or whatnot.
Yeah.
They could ultimately all meet. Like, I watched a guy do all the rankings of the leagues and stuff, and like I say, they're pretty close. Like, there's good strong points about each league, and I think it's finding the right fit. But it's intriguing. Like, how do you, like, going for the Brooks Bandits, going over there blind? Um, I'm sure the learning curve was high, but they had some unique circumstances, like, just not just only the ice size, but travel and everything. Like, so they rose up to all that. So I'm sure for them it was a great learning experience, and I think it helped them along they're ticking along pretty good right now in league play and stuff like that. But it was unique. Like I just haven't seen that in a long time, that they would take that opportunity again. And again, I think I admire Brooks because they take unique opportunities in
Yeah.
lots of ways. Like they take risks, or whatever you want to call it. They think big. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about your, and because I'm curious about this too. What's it like with Brooks Bandit specifically? You're a skills coach. I looked you up and I'm like, okay, played youth sports in Canada, like you're talking about when we were talking about Paul, but then
Yeah.
you were a teacher for a long time. And then I guess you decided I want to do this hockey thing for not just as a hobby, but go out and do it on as a full-time
Yeah.
profession.
I was pretty into it. Like I say, I could show you, yeah, protected lists and stuff. At 14, I'm kind of a lead guy, and I'm protected with the Lethbridge Broncos. Joe Sakic is protected at 14, and Rod Brindamore is protected at 14. And there's a few other 14s. And so I knew I had this talent for hockey. But for whatever reason, dad raised me to be more like Nylander or Gretzky than he did to be a tough guy. And so maybe I didn't fit in my choices of routes and stuff. So yeah, and hockey, you get awards and you get recognized. And in school teaching, you don't really get recognized. Nobody's going to say who's the best gym teacher in the world and who's the best phys ed teacher in the world. So you didn't get a lot of recognition, and there were certain signs that were telling me to maybe go to hockey. And so once I was school teaching, a guy that was in my town, in my little town, he said, if Kevin Yellowaga is teaching at your school, you should get one of these Hockey Canada skills academies. And back then they were just being piloted. Now this Hockey Canada skills academies are in most of the schools, or not most, would be in 50% of the schools, or 35% of the schools have a hockey program where the kids can do skills. But it was unknown. TSN came, and when we eventually got one, TSN came and Kelly Rudy filmed us. I had to do training with Bjorn Kinding from he's a Swedish national coach of some sort at the time. And he was very heavy into biomechanics and teaching of technical skills. So I learned from him, and I was fascinated, and I had a really good hand-eye. Like I hand-eye, and my skating base was very strong. So those things were strong. I could demo things pretty well. But then I started to just study and relentlessly study. Like I would study Stamkos's coach, and I would study Daniel Broberg from DB Hockey Factory. I study and all these guys, but you got to kind of know who the best guys are. And I always believed in balance and athleticism and all these, and being a good mover. And you kind of figure things out. Like my friend was I'll just go on a couple tangents here. My friend was a third liner on my university team, but he's the strength and conditioning coach for Pittsburgh. So when Crosby gets hurt, he's on the ice with Crosby. And I said, you weren't even a good hockey player. How do you showing Crosby anything? And he said, I just make it creative and dynamic, and give him some ideas, and kind of have fun with it, challenge his mind a bit. And he said, it's not that hard. And I would go watch those Flames practices a lot. And so as I'm school teaching, a guy says, like, and I've done a couple of Alberta Cups now, and I've had some of these top kids, these top 14-year-olds play for me and I'm coaching in those events because I want to stay connected to hockey, but I'm still a school teacher. And then a guy ultimately says, I'll pay you more than you make teaching to come and run my school academy. And my grade 7 class had Braden Point in it and Logan Thompson, the goalie for Vegas. And I'm in that academy. There's about 8 to 10 other kids that are playing WHL or in Europe, in Europe even now. And so I was like, wow, now I have these really good kids, and I really better even study more, even though I was a good player and I was fast. there's got to be more to this hockey than just being fast. So I guess, to make a long story a little bit shorter, I just continue to study and love it. And at that point when it was scary to leave teaching and all the securities that you might have with teaching, but ultimately my passion for hockey, has won out, and I continue today to do morning programs. And like you say, I've been with the Bandits for 12 years, and it's a lot of work. I'm not a natural by any stretch of the imagination, but I think my work ethic and my studying puts me in a decent category and in the hockey world, so to speak. Yeah.
Well, here's what I think is great. It's not the Cale Makar story, right?
Yeah.
Those you get enough. I mean, I'm sure you've gotten quite a bit of notoriety about that. But so for certain, I don't know how, it wasn't deliberate, but I try to dabble in the social media world, and somehow I subscribed to your YouTube channel.
Oh, neat.
And I clicked on the so I get, when you post a video on YouTube, it pops up and it says, Kevin Yellowaga. So guess what? So it's not about Cale Makar. Your last video that you posted was not about Cale Makar, was it?
No, probably not. No.
No, it's about skills for 7-year-olds.
Yes, yes, yes,
And to
yes.
me, it's so telling, because to me, that's
That's
what
right.
I grow up. I mean, I've been coaching here in North Carolina, and it's so transparent that it's the love of the game or love of the sport. Because if it was anything else, you would not be posting 7-year-old skills. And this is not like, how do you become an NHLer, but it's stuff that's really good for a 7-year-old. But to me, that is so pure and so honest and so refreshing in the world of social media, that is all about fancy parachutes, um, uh, hype videos, and fancy deeks, and Michigan goals and stuff like that.
I post so much, like, cause again, and they told me this in Sweden. I don't know if it's true. Like, you cycle through, the top coaches go all the way up to junior, and then they work their way back down, because I was always more comfortable with the 7, 8, and 9-year-olds, what you do with them. For me, throwing me into junior players, I was nervous, because I'm like, they're going to be better than me. Like, I can't keep up to this, or they're too good. Like, they're going to know that that I'm not the guy or whatever. I was just had this anxiety about it. But like, my friend helped me through that. And then you get to work with them and you realize that it's a lot about the fundamentals. But why I post even stuff of, I shared one with my friend the other day. We have our dog on the ice and we're just playing give and go. My son's 3 years old and we're just playing give and go around the dog. Like, just creating these stimulating environments for kids is important, and athletic environments, and allowing them to do other sports. And I could go on a tangent of that, but I like to share ideas of what a free and fun and thinking environment would be for kids. Because hockey gets, at 7 years old, they're racing for pucks, and we think whoever can race and win that puck is going to be the best player at 14. And there's so much more to it, and so much more to development, and the golden age of learning, they say, is 10 to 12. And I really believe how we help kids and stimulate their minds and build athletes at 6, 7, 8, 9, that's your real window for development. And I'll take that a step further. So I think Cale's in one picture on my website, like, but I don't ever say I made Cale Makar. I got to work with him at 8 years old. It was fun. I was lucky. I got to see what that looks like, but it wasn't skill stuff. His dad wanted me to work on team things and habits and details. And I didn't make Cale Makar. All those things you do when you're younger is what helps make the kid. And then you hope that maybe you stimulate them or help their minds a little bit and stuff like that to to help them along the way. And Braden Point, same thing. At 12 years old, Braden Point's, if he never had another skills coach, Braden Point's going to make it. And I know some people don't believe in talent or 1%, but I've seen the 1% that does go through, and they will go through. They're born that good. Like, yes, they need to train, but they're born that good. But you're right. The stories that I'm the most proud of, like I've taken a player that's completely pulled himself out of minor hockey, and I was his only skills coach, and his dad. And he made the WHL at 15 years old and played playoffs. And he's rated in the NHL draft this year. That I'm more proud of. There's sometimes you're lucky to get kids that you cross paths with, and you've worked with them, and you do give them some ideas, but I hesitate to say I made that kid, or I was a big part of that. Pretty small part of
That's
Cale,
what
even though he was with the Bandits for 2.5 years. I probably spent more time with him than some other guys that say they made Cale,
but isn't that what coaching is all about, right?
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
coaching is mentorship, coaching is leading,
Yes.
coaching is challenging, but it's about I go back to a story that Paul Strand told me when I was, I was such a low level coach at youth hockey tier 2 here, but I had a kid, and I called Paul and I was like, look, I got this kid, and he coughs and throws pizzas all the time, and I don't know, maybe he's gonna be a better forward, and he wants to play defense. And he looked at me and he said, we were on the phone, and he said, well, aren't you the coach? Best advice most people have said. He's basically looking at me and said, well, isn't that your job, is to help
help them
him
to
get better, not
help
to
them
throw pizzas,
help them to find their way. Yes, and I did a good job of that. Like with Braden Point, I was able to challenge him. I didn't set the bar down here for him. I set the bar, here's another challenge for you. For Cale, here's another challenge for you. And it didn't take long with Cale before, though, I started saying to the other guys, you need to watch how he does his fake and how he slides on this edge. So you also learn from them. So that makes me a better coach. I'm learning from him, but I'm also trying to find ways to challenge them. So yes, one thing we do as coaches too is where we set the bar. And in your example, how can we help them along the way? Maybe it's finding a new position. Maybe Cale would have been better as a forward. We don't know. Like, how do we help them mentally and help them along the way? And we're a small part of that, because ultimately these guys do it themselves. Like Braden Point is special. Cale is pretty special. Like, and they're lucky that all those kids have a good upbringing too. It's true what they say in hockey. Like most of them that do go through, my wife the other day said she started seeing some of these NHL players making a few mistakes or poor decisions. And she said, but does that Crosby guy ever make any of those? And I said, he really doesn't, the good ones. And Joe Sakic, who's my age, he had his head on right at a young age. And so, my wife always says, I wish the parents put as much energy into their schoolwork as they did their hockey, and so I think, you need both parts for these kids, if that's some bit of advice I could give too.
Well, let's round out with that, because I think that with this question, and that is, we always ask every guest this, and that is, what you met yourself at 17. You're a few years beyond that, me too, but you've picked up a few things along the way. But
yes.
Especially now you're a dad of a player that's 15, but what things do you know now that you wished you would have known back then? What advice would you give yourself at 17?
Gosh, for myself, it would be just to just not worry about so many things that you can't control. Like, just you just worry a lot, I think, as a young kid and stuff. Lots of worry, lots of, trying to impress impress mom and dad and these kinds of things, or I don't know, yeah, I think again, if it was advice, I would calm things down and slow things down too, not be in such a rush. That would be my biggest one. So all that anxiety became because I'm rushing and I wanted to be drafted at 17. So I got caught in a rush, and then I'm trying to get drafted, but there's a lot of fighting in my league, and you needed to fight back then and stuff. And I wasn't trained that way. And just different. I just wouldn't rush. I would be really, really patient and enjoy things more, and not get caught up in the whole race of hockey and the noise of drafting and things like that. And yeah, just make good decisions. I ultimately, I played my best hockey. What I learned is, what I read in every development book is, you'll be playing your best hockey at 22, 23.
Yeah.
So I could brag to you about how great I was at 14. And I was the best in Medicine Hat. I was better than Trevor Linden, possibly, like people would have said. I'm sure I produced more and put up more numbers. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Again, you want to be in the game long enough that you can be playing your best hockey at 21, 22, 23. I'd flex my muscles and show my dad how big I am at 17. And my dad would say, you're nothing. You're not going to be anything until you're 21, 22. And he's right. And so we're too quick to judge kids. But I don't know. That's a tough answer, because my own story would be so different.
Yeah. But
I
it's good.
probably would have learned to fight more when I was younger and not score so many goals. Just fight. I would have maybe made it. But
Well, your answer translates better to the audience today, Uh,
yeah, for
la-
sure.
last thing is, we've got a partnership. This is a Swedish organization that we partner with, called Target Aid, which is targetaid.com. And one of the emphasis, this is something we started in year 2, which is, how do we help organizations and clubs get attention with content, with fundraising? So we had this guy who was a hockey guy as coach on, and he's active with his company called Target Aid. So we developed a platform on Target Aid, and every guest that we have on gets to mention the team in your heart, or it's called Klubben i mitt hjärta, which means the team in my heart. And then you'll be posted. Your team in your heart will be posted on my Target Aid platform for content. So the first Canadian. So which team is in your heart?
Oh, wow. Well, yeah, like I don't know if you mean it has to be like a kids team or a pro team, or
No, it could be anything. It's kind of like, so we've had a lot of guests on that says, well, yeah, I play for this organization now, but really the team that I consider my team is this, and here's why. And some of it's been a few guys have been. I thought for sure that it was going to be this one because I grew up on that one, but then they're like, no, this is really
okay. I know what you mean. For me, there would be two, but the main one for me would be like when I got to play overseas in Europe for the Tilburg Trappers. And they're now not in Holland, but they play in the German league, but they are still the Tilburg Trappers. They might not be, they might have changed the Tilburg Trappers anyway. They're easy to find in the Netherlands. That team, man, for me to play university and then get a chance to play pro in Europe, and this was right before my dad passed away, and all the memories of just them embracing me and getting paid to play hockey and to play overseas. Like, I'll never forget that in my life. Like, a lot of guys say, well, you never really made it. And for me, that was making it. I got a teaching degree from hockey, and at the University of Lethbridge. And I also got to play professional in Europe. And it did feel like, okay, I did it. I did it.
You
I did it.
absolutely did. I mean, that's the confirmation that is more important than anybody else.
Yeah.
It's what you just described. That noise of, gotta have played one game in the NHL. Sure, that would be awesome, but that
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily, so what? I mean, there's plenty of people that play many games in the NHL and they don't, you know, it didn't mean anything or whatever. So
And
yeah.
I play, and you talk about leagues. It felt like I was in the NHL, like the Netherlands league. It was the NHL to those people, and I played as hard as I was in the NHL, you
Yeah.
know. So for them, that'll always be a pretty big love for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for bringing that on. Thanks for
Yeah.
coming on, and we're gonna have to have you on a different time talking about some other topics. You've got so much knowledge in this, and
Yeah.
hopefully, I mean, our goal here is to inform and educate, and hopefully, we've shined some light on AJHL, Brooks. We talked about some different players and been fun.
Well, and just in closing, like in a skill development way, like there are a lot of leaders, and Canada does some good things, and we're known as the hockey nation, but I really want to, if I was educating people, I think United States do an amazing job as well, like a lot of knowledge and good things that they're doing in skill development. And for the stuff that I teach, I find so many guys from Sweden doing a good job. And I'm sure you could say a little bit about everything, but to me, that the leaders like are some of the things that Hockey USA is doing, and some of the things they're doing in Sweden are things that people need to keep learning from to make this game stronger. It's not just Canada anymore, you know. So I appreciate like just that part of it too, that it's a world game and a global game, and now everybody's caught up. Like I love Nylander and Jesper Bratt and watching these guys. Holy smacks, can they ever move, you know?
Well,
And then there's families like the Hughes. There's another one. Like, how do you get 3 good kids? Like, that's incredible. So all that, I love just studying development and how you can help kids. And
yeah.
it's never just hockey. So anyway, that's my thoughts.
Well, I
Yeah.
appreciate it. We'll put an end cap on that, and we'll have you
Yeah.
back on for sure.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.